After my 31st birthday, at the family dinner, my sister mocked me. Actually, we wish you were never born. My parents burst into laughter. I didn't argue. I just ate my last bite of cake and then left. 2 weeks later, someone called in panic. "Your family is in big trouble." I replied softly, "I know." The cake was store-bought, vanilla, with that too sweet frosting that tastes like chemicals and regret. I remember thinking that as I sat there at my parents' dining table, surrounded by people who shared my blood, but not my heart, that this was fitting. 31 candles would have been excessive. So there were none. Just a cake with happy birthday scrawled in blue icing. The letters uneven, like whoever wrote it couldn't be bothered to care. My mother had texted me that morning. "Dinner at 6. Don't be late. Not happy birthday. Not, we can't wait to celebrate you." Just instructions, delivered with the warmth of a parking ticket. I should have known then. But hope is a stubborn thing, isn't it? It lives in the spaces between disappointments, feeding on scraps, convincing you that maybe this time will be different. Maybe this year they'll see me. Maybe this year they'll remember that I matter. I wore the blue dress, the one my sister Claire had complimented 2 Christmases ago, back when we still pretended we were close. It's funny how you hold on to those moments, those tiny validations, like they're proof of something real. I'd kept that dress in the front of my closet ever since, waiting for another chance to feel seen. The house looked the same as always. My childhood home in suburban Connecticut, all beige siding and black shutters, a lawn my father obsessed over every weekend. There were 2 cars in the driveway, Dad's Lexus and Claire's BMW. The third spot, where my Honda Civic should have gone, remained conspicuously empty. I'd parked on the street, as I always did now, as I'd been trained to do. Inside, the smell of roasted chicken and disappointment hung in the air. "You're here?" Mum said, not looking up from her phone. She was sitting in the living room, perfectly coiffed as always, her highlighted hair catching the light from the chandelier Dad had insisted on installing 5 years ago. Too fancy for the space, but that was the point. "Claire and Marcus are in the dining room. Your father's opening wine." No happy birthday. No hug. Just a spatial orientation, like I was a delivery person who needed directions. I walked through the living room, past the wall of family photos that stopped including me somewhere around 2010. There's Claire at her law school graduation. Claire and Marcus on their wedding day. Claire pregnant, glowing, surrounded by streamers at her baby shower. And me? There's one photo from high school, half hidden behind a plant, where my face is slightly out of focus. It's been that way for 6 years. The dining room was set for 5. My sister sat at the far end of the table, scrolling through her phone, while her husband Marcus nursed a beer and stared at nothing in particular. They looked up when I entered. "Oh," Claire said, her voice flat. "You came." "Happy birthday to me," I replied, forcing lightness into my tone. Marcus grunted something that might have been acknowledgement. He'd never liked me much, or maybe he just absorbed Claire's disdain through osmosis. Either way. He looked at me like I was background furniture, barely worth noticing. "Where's Sophie?" I asked, referring to their 3-year-old daughter. With Marcus's parents, Claire said, returning her attention to her phone. We didn't think she'd be interested in sitting through a dinner. Translation: we didn't want to deal with her while also dealing with you. My father emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 bottles of wine, a red and a white, both expensive. He was the kind of man who believed that the price tag on a bottle could compensate for the emptiness in a room. He set them down with a flourish. The prodigal daughter arrives, he announced, as if I hadn't been specifically instructed to come. As if I were the one who'd been absent from their lives, and not the other way around. I took my seat. The chair across from Claire, next to the empty seat where my mother would eventually sit. The position in the family had always been literal as well as metaphorical. Adjacent to the action, never central to it. Dinner began with the usual small talk. Marcus talked about work, something in finance that he explained with the condescension of a man who assumed everyone found him fascinating. Claire chimed in with updates about her law firm, dropping names of partners and clients like they were credentials. My mother made appreciative noises, leaning forward with interest. Her face animated in a way it never was when she looked at me. I ate my chicken. It was dry. And what about you? My father asked eventually, as if suddenly remembering I was there. Still doing. What is it you do again? I'm an archivist, I said, the same answer I'd given him at least a dozen times. At the Historical Society, I work with... Right, he interrupted, already bored. The dusty books thing. Historical preservation, I corrected gently. I'm currently working on a collection of letters from the... That's nice, my mother cut in, her tone suggesting it was anything but. Claire, tell her about the partnership discussion. And just like that, I was erased again. Claire launched into a story about her potential promotion to junior partner, and the table came alive. Questions were asked, praise was heaped. My father refilled glasses, my mother beamed. I ate my vegetables. They were overcooked. The cake came out after dinner, carried by my mother like it was an afterthought she'd just remembered. She set it down in front of me without ceremony. Make a wish, she said mechanically. I looked at the cake, at the crooked letters, at the faces around me, none of them meeting my eyes. And I thought about what I'd wish for, if wishes were real things, and not just the lies we'd tell children to make disappointment taste sweeter. I wished to disappear. I blew out the imaginary candles, and Claire started cutting the cake before I'd even finished exhaling. So, Marcus said, accepting a slice from his wife, 31. That's getting up there. For what? I asked. He shrugged. You know, life, marriage, kids, the whole thing. Some people are late bloomers, my mother added, and the kindness in her voice was somehow worse than outright cruelty. It was pity wearing a smile. I'm focused on my career, I said quietly. Claire laughed. Actually laughed. Career? Nina, you make what, 40,000 a year? That's not a career. That's a hobby with a paycheck. My father chuckled. Marcus smirked into his wineglass. It's meaningful work, I said. And I hated how small my voice sounded. Meaningful, Claire repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it lacking. You know what's meaningful? Contributing. Building something. I'm about to make partner at 33. Marcus is managing a portfolio worth 8 figures. We have a daughter, a house, actual stakes in the world. And you have... My mother trailed off, gesturing vaguely at me with her fork. Books? History matters, I said. But my voice had no strength behind it. Preserving the past. The past is dead, my father interrupted. Your problem, Nina, has always been that you're looking backward when you should be looking forward. If you'd gone to business school like we suggested, my mother added, you'd be in a different position now. But you insisted on that liberal arts degree, that master's in something no one cares about. Someone has to care about history, I said, and I could hear the desperation creeping in. Someone has to remember. Remember what? Claire leaned forward, and there was something sharp in her eyes, something that had been building all evening. Remember that you've never quite measured up? That you've always been the one we had to explain? The one who made things complicated? The room went very quiet. Claire? My mother said, but there was no rebuke in it. Just observation. What? Claire continued. We're all thinking it. We've been thinking it for years. Every family gathering, every holiday, we have to tiptoe around Nina and her feelings, pretend like she's accomplished something worth celebrating. That's not fair, I said. And I felt something cracking inside my chest. Fair? Claire's laugh was sharp, brittle. You want to talk about fair? Do you know how exhausting it is, having you as a sister? Always the victim, always the overlooked one, always needing validation. I don't... You do, she cut me off. You've built your entire identity around being the family disappointment. It's like you need to feel sorry for yourself. Like you can't exist without the narrative that we don't love you enough. I stared at her. At my sister, who I'd looked up to my entire life. At this woman who taught me how to braid my hair when I was 7, who'd let me sleep in her room during thunderstorms, who I'd believed, despite everything, still cared about me somewhere deep down. That's not true, I whispered. Isn't it? She tilted her head. Think about it, Nina. Really think. Have you ever, in your entire life, done something that made us proud? Something that made us want to celebrate you, not just tolerate you. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My mother looked down at her plate. My father studied his wine glass. Marcus checked his phone. And Claire just looked at me with something that might have been triumph, or might have been relief, like she'd been waiting years to say this out loud. Actually, she said, her voice taking on a casual, almost cheerful quality, we wish you were never born. My parents burst into laughter. Not nervous laughter, not uncomfortable deflection, real laughter, the kind that comes from genuine amusement, the kind that crinkles eyes and shakes shoulders. My mother actually wiped at her eyes. My father slapped the table. Oh, Claire. My mother gasped between laughs. That's terrible, but accurate, my father added, still chuckling. I sat there, frozen, the taste of too sweet frosting still coating my tongue, and something fundamental shifted inside me. Not broke. That would suggest it was whole to begin with. No. This was different. This was clarity, sharp and cold and absolute. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't do any of the things I might have done even a year ago. when I still believed that if I just tried hard enough, loved hard enough, proved myself enough, they would see me. Instead, I took one last bite of cake. Let the vanilla sweetness dissolve slowly on my tongue. Felt the chemical aftertaste. Noted the way my family was already moving on. Already starting a new conversation. Already forgetting I was then near her. Then I stood up. Nina, my mother started. But there was no urgency in it. Just mild surprise. Thank you for dinner, I said quietly. Politely. Because that's what you do, isn't it? Even when people are cruel. Even when they've just laughed at the idea of your non-existence. You say thank you. You follow the script. I walked to the door, put on my coat, picked up my purse. Behind me, I heard Claire say something to Marcus. Heard him laugh. Heard the clink of the glasses being refilled, the scrape of forks on plates, the sound of life, continuing without me, as if I'd already gone. I stepped out into the October cold and closed the door behind me. The air tasted like freedom and frost. I got in my Honda Civic, my paid-off, practical, unglamorous Honda Civic, and I sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, looking at the house where I grew up, at the windows glowing warm and golden, at the family inside who wished I'd never been born. And I smiled. Because they had no idea what I'd been doing for the past 3 years. No idea what doors had opened when I stopped trying to prove myself to them and started proving myself to myself. No idea that the hobby with a paycheck had led to connections, opportunities, discoveries. No idea that in 2 weeks, everything they thought they knew about me would be revealed as the fiction it always was. I started the engine and drove away from my childhood home for what I knew, with absolute certainty, would be the last time. The moon was bright. The streets were empty. And I felt, for the first time in 31 years, completely free. My apartment was small, but it was mine. A 1-bedroom walk-up in New Haven, close enough to the historical society to bike when the weather was good, far enough from my family to breathe. I'd lived here for 6 years, and in that time, I'd made it into something that felt like a life. Books lined every wall, some from my work, some from estate sales, some just because I liked the weight of them in my hands. There was a reading chair by the window, worn leather, that I'd found at a thrift store and reupholstered myself. A small kitchen where I actually cooked, because eating alone is different than eating lonely, and I'd learned to make that distinction. Plants on the windowsills, succulents mostly, the kind that thrived on neglect. I'd built this place carefully, brick by brick, into a sanctuary. And tonight, as I walked in and set my keys on the counter, I felt the full weight of that sanctuary settle around me like armor. I didn't cry. I'm not sure why people expect tears at moments like this, as if grief only counts when it's visible, performative, wet. My grief was dry and old, worn smooth by years of small disappointments. Tonight had just been the final cataloguing of a collection I'd been archiving my entire life. The ways my family didn't love me. Instead of crying, I made tea. Earl Grey, hot enough to burn my tongue slightly, bergamot rising in steam. I sat in my reading chair and pulled out my phone. There were no messages. No get home safe from my mother. No sorry about Claire from Alman anyone, because no one was sorry. Why would they be? They'd finally said out loud what they'd been signaling for years. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name, Dr. Evelyn Hartford. My finger hovered over the call button. It was late, past 10, but she'd told me to reach out any time. That's what she'd said 3 months ago, when everything had started to crystallize into something real. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Nina. Her voice was warm, alert despite the hour. How did it go? Exactly as expected, I said. And I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Maybe worse. Definitely more honest. Tell me. So I did. I told her about the cake and the conversation and the laughter. About Claire's words and my parents' reaction and the way Marcus had just sat there, a silent co-signer to my erasure. I recited it like I was reading from a transcript, clinical and clear, because that's what years of archival work teaches you, how to document pain without drowning in it. When I finished, there was a long pause. Are you all right? Dr. Hartford asked finally. Yes, I said, and I meant it. I'm ready. Are you sure? Because we can wait. We can push it back, give you time. No. I interrupted gently. It's time. They need to know. And I need to stop carrying this. Another pause. Then, okay, I'll make the calls tomorrow. Everything will be in motion by the end of the week. Thank you, Evelyn. Nina, she said, and her voice took on that particular quality it had when she was being both my friend and my advocate. You've earned this. What's coming isn't revenge, it's revelation. Don't forget that. We hung up, and I sat there in my reading chair, tea cooling in my hands, and I thought about the architecture of silence. How it's built, room by room, year by year, until you're living in a vast empty house where your voice doesn't echo because there's nothing to bounce off of. How you learn to move through that house so carefully, so quietly, trying not to disturb anything, trying not to take up space, and how sometimes the only way forward is to demolish the whole structure and start again. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I worked. My laptop sat on the small desk in the corner of my bedroom, and I opened it with the familiar sense of purpose that had sustained me through the hardest years. The screen glowed blue in the darkness, and I pulled up the files I'd been compiling. Document after document, email after email, scanned pages and digital records, and carefully organized evidence of a life my family knew nothing about. 3 years ago, I'd been asked to consult on a private collection. The Whitmore Archives, a massive holding of letters, journals, and financial records belonging to one of Connecticut's oldest families. The kind of collection that institutions dream about. The kind that redefines historical understanding of a region, an era, a way of life. The Whitmore family had been wealthy for generations. Old money, the kind that came with land and influence and names on buildings. But the family line had died out, and the estate had gone to a distant cousin who lived in California and wanted nothing to do with Connecticut or its history. She'd been about to sell everything to a private buyer, someone who would have buried the collection in a private library, inaccessible to scholars or the public. That's where I came in. My boss at the Historical Society had recommended me. Nina knows this period better than anyone, he'd said. If anyone can evaluate this collection properly, it's her. I'd driven out to the estate on a grey morning in November 3 years ago and walked into a house that smelled like time itself. Room after room of furniture covered in sheets, paintings staring down from walls, and in the library, God, the library, boxes and boxes of documents that hadn't been touched in decades. I'd spent 6 months on that project. Cataloguing, researching, cross-referencing, finding threads that connected the Whitmore family to major historical events, uncovering letters that shed new light on the Civil War, Reconstruction, the Gilded Age. It was the kind of work that made me remember why I'd chosen this field, why I'd endured my family's disappointment to pursue something that mattered to me. And then, in month 7, I'd found the connection. It was in a bundle of letters from 1891, correspondence between Margaret Whitmore and her sister in Boston, casual mentions of business dealings, social events, family news. And there, buried in a postscript of a letter dated July 14th, a single line: "Father has finalized the partnership with the Thorns. Harrison assures us it will prove most profitable." Thorn was my mother's maiden name. I'd sat there in that silent library, holding a letter written 134 years ago, and felt the ground shift beneath me. Because I knew that partnership. I'd heard stories about it growing up, the way families passed down myths. The Thorns had been business partners with someone wealthy, someone important, but the partnership had dissolved, and the money had been lost. And that's why the Thorn family, why my mother's family, had ended up middle class instead of wealthy. Except the story was wrong. I spent the next 6 months tracing that partnership through the archives, finding contracts, ledgers, stock certificates, building a picture of what had actually happened. And what I discovered was this: the partnership hadn't dissolved. It had been structured as a multi-generational investment trust, designed to benefit both families in perpetuity. The Whitmore side had been managed by lawyers and financial advisors, passed down through proper channels. But the Thorn side had been forgotten. Somewhere between 1891 and 1920, the knowledge of the trust had been lost. Maybe someone died without passing on the information. Maybe papers were destroyed in a fire. Maybe it was simple neglect, the way valuable things sometimes slip through cracks in family memory. But the trust itself? The trust had continued to exist, growing quietly for over a century, compounding interest and dividends, waiting for someone to remember it was there, waiting for someone like me to find it. It took another year to verify everything, to work with the lawyers and financial historians and estate specialists, to confirm that yes, this was real, and yes, as the only living descendant of the Thorn line through my mother, I was the legal heir to a trust now worth approximately $47 million. $47 million. The number still didn't feel real, even though I'd been living with it for over a year now. Even though the lawyers had assured me it was mein Patung. Even though the first distributions had already been quietly deposited into accounts I'd set up specifically for this purpose. I hadn't told anyone. Not my family, obviously, but not my friends either. Not my co-workers. Not even my boss who'd gotten me the job that led to this discovery. Because I needed time. Time to process what this meant. Time to figure out who I was when I wasn't the family disappointment. Time to make plans. And tonight, sitting in my apartment after my family had laughed at the idea of my non-existence, I knew the time for silence was over. I scrolled through my files, reviewing the plan I'd spent months crafting with Dr. Hartford. who wasn't actually a doctor in the medical sense, but an attorney specializing in estate law and family trusts. She'd been recommended by the firm handling the Whitmore estate. And she'd become not just my lawyer, but my friend, my strategist, my co-conspirator in the quiet dismantling of everything my family thought they knew. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Phase 1. Establish my new financial reality with the relevant institutions and authorities. Create the necessary structures to manage the wealth properly. Set up the foundations and trusts that would carry my work forward. This phase was already complete. Phase 2. Quietly resign from my position at the Historical Society and transition to the role I'd been preparing for. Director of my own research foundation, dedicated to preserving historical archives and making them accessible to scholars. This was scheduled for next week. Phase 3. Let my family discover, on their own terms, that everything they thought they knew about me was fiction. This would begin in exactly 2 weeks, at the Foundation's public launch event, which I'd deliberately scheduled at a venue where they'd hear about it through mutual connections. But tonight had changed something. The laughter, the casual cruelty, the wish that I'd never been born. It had crystallized my resolve in a way that months of planning hadn't quite achieved. They needed to know. Not to hurt them, though I won't pretend some part of me didn't relish the coming revelation, but because I needed to be free of them, truly free. And that meant ending the fiction that we were a family who simply had different priorities or communication styles. That meant being honest about what I'd always known, but had never allowed myself to fully acknowledge. They didn't love me. They never had. And I didn't need them to. I pulled up a blank document and started writing an email. Dear Mother, Father, and Claire, I'm writing to inform you that I will not be attending any future family gatherings. This isn't a dramatic gesture or a request for attention. It's simply a boundary I should have established years ago. Tonight confirmed what I've known but haven't wanted to accept. You don't value me, don't respect me, and fundamentally wish I wasn't part of your lives. I'm writing to tell you that I release you from the obligation of pretending otherwise. I won't be reaching out. I won't be available for holidays, birthdays, or emergencies. I'm not asking for apologies or explanations. I'm simply stepping out of your lives as cleanly as possible, which I think we can all agree is what you've wanted for a long time. I wish you well. I hope you build the family dynamic you've always wanted, without the complication of my presence. Nina. I read it over 3 times. It was calm, clear, and completely unlike the begging, pleading, emotional appeals I might have written even a year ago. It stated facts without accusation, established boundaries without drama, and gave them exactly what they wanted. My absence. I scheduled it to send at 8 a.m. when I knew my mother would be checking her email with her morning coffee, when my father would be scanning his phone before work, when Claire would be getting Sophie ready for preschool. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed. And for the first time in months, I slept dreamlessly, deeply, the sleep of someone who has finally stopped carrying weight that was never theirs to carry in the first place. The email went out at exactly 8 a.m. I was already awake, sitting at my small kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, when I heard the soft whoosh of the message sending. I didn't check my phone. There was no point. I knew what would happen, or rather, what wouldn't happen. My family didn't do emotional processing. They did dismissal and deflection. They'd read the email, maybe exchange a few texts about how dramatic I was being told, and then they'd move on. Maybe they'd feel relief. Maybe they'd barely feel anything at all. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. I had work to do. At 9 a.m., I called my boss, Richard Chen, director of the Connecticut Historical Society. He answered with his usual cheerful efficiency. "Nina, what can I do for you?" "Richard," I said, "I need to schedule a meeting. Today, if possible. There's something I need to discuss with you." A pause. Richard had worked with me for 8 years. He knew I wasn't the type to request urgent meetings without cause. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I assured him. "Better than fine, actually. But there are some changes coming, and I wanted you to hear them from me directly." We settled on 2 p.m., and I spent the morning putting the final touches on documents I'd been preparing for weeks. My resignation letter, written with care and genuine gratitude for the opportunities Richard had given me. A detailed plan for transitioning my current projects to other archivists. And a proposal. One I thought Richard would find interesting. At 1:45, I walked into the Historical Society's administrative offices. The building was a renovated Victorian mansion, all dark wood and high ceilings, the kind of place where you could feel history in the walls. I'd loved working here. I still loved it. But love isn't always enough reason to stay. Richard's office overlooked the garden. An autumn light was streaming through the windows when I knocked on his open door. "Nina," he said, standing and gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please. Sit. You've got me curious." I sat, setting my folder on the desk between us, and took a breath. "I'm resigning," I said simply. "Effective 3 weeks from today." Richard's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, concern, calculation. "May I ask why? If it's about salary, I've been meaning to talk to you about—" "It's not about money," I interrupted gently. "And it's not about dissatisfaction with the work or the institution. Richard, you've been an incredible mentor, and this place has given me skills and experiences I'll carry forever. But I'm starting something new, my own foundation focused on historical preservation and public access to archives. The Nina Thorne Foundation for Historical Research." I watched his eyebrows rise. "Your own foundation? Nina, that's a massive undertaking. The funding alone is already secured," I said, and slid the folder across the desk. "I'd like to explain, if you have time." For the next hour, I told Richard the story. Not all of it. I didn't mention my family or the birthday dinner or any of the personal context. But I told him about the Whitmore archives, about the discovery of the trust, about the legal processes and financial structures I'd been building for over a year. I showed him the paperwork that proved it was real, the foundation documents that showed it was legitimate, the board members I'd already recruited, respected historians and archivists from across New England. Richard listened with the focused attention he brought to rare documents, occasionally asking questions, mostly just taking it all in. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "Nina," he said finally, "this is extraordinary and somewhat devastating for us. You're one of our best archivists, but I'm genuinely thrilled for you. This kind of opportunity doesn't come along often." "Which brings me to my proposal," I said, pulling out another document. I'd like the Foundation's first major project to be a partnership with the Historical Society. A grant to digitize your most valuable collections, hire additional staff, upgrade your facilities. 5 million over 5 years, with the potential for a renewal. Richard's mouth actually fell open. 5. Nina, that would be transformative. We could finally tackle the backlog, could make materials available to researchers worldwide. That's the idea, I said, smiling. I'm not leaving because I don't believe in this work. I'm leaving because I want to do more of it on a larger scale. And I want to make sure the places that taught me, that gave me my start, are part of that growth. We talked details for another half hour, shook hands, and agreed to begin the formal partnership process immediately. When I left Richard's office, I felt lighter than I had in days. This was what I'd been working toward. Not just the money, though that was undeniably important, but the chance to do work that mattered, on my own terms, without having to justify its value to people who would never understand it. I was walking to my car when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Nina, we need to talk about your email. This is unnecessarily dramatic. Call me when you're ready to discuss this like an adult. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. 3 more messages came through in quick succession. Claire. Really, Nina? An email? You couldn't even handle this face-to-face. Claire. This is exactly what I was talking about, Little. You're always the victim. Dad. Your mother is upset. Call her. I silenced my phone and drove home. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. I worked out my notice at the Historical Society, training my replacement and documenting everything I'd been working on. I met with the Foundation's board, finalized the event details for our public launch, and coordinated with a PR firm that specialized in non-profit announcements. The launch was scheduled for a Saturday evening, 2 weeks after my birthday. We'd rented the Beaumont Gallery, a converted warehouse space in downtown Hartford that had become the venue for high-profile events. Charity galas, political fundraisers, corporate celebrations. The kind of place that attracted attention, that made local news, that ensured the right people would be there. I'd sent invitations to everyone who mattered in Connecticut's historical and cultural circles. Directors of museums and libraries, prominent researchers and academics, major donors to cultural institutions, local politicians with an interest in education and preservation. And yes, I'd sent invitations to select members of the social circles my family moved in. People who knew my parents, who went to the same country club, who would absolutely mention the event to Claire and my mother. I hadn't invited my family directly. That would have been too obvious, too intentional. This way, when they found out, and they would find out, it would come as a genuine surprise. A revelation that struck with full force precisely because it came from outside sources, from people whose opinions they actually cared about. My phone continued to buzz periodically with messages from my mother and Claire. I didn't read them. I'd set up a filter that sorted their messages into a folder I never opened. They existed in my phone like historical documents awaiting archival. Present but not immediate, available for review but not demanding attention. 5 days before the event, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Nina Thorne? A male voice. Professional. Slightly urgent. Yes? This is Marcus Chen from the Hartford Courier. I'm working on a story about your foundation and the launch event. I was hoping we could talk. My heart rate picked up slightly, but I kept my voice steady. Of course. What would you like to know? We talked for 30 minutes. He was thorough, asking about my background, my research, how I'd come into the funding, what my vision was for the foundation. I answered carefully, honestly, focusing on the work rather than the personal story. When he asked about my family, I simply said, "They've been supportive of my education," which was technically true if you counted paying for college before they decided I'd made the wrong choice. "One more question," he said at the end. "The Whitmore Archives discovery, that was your work, correct? You were the one who identified the trust?" "Yes," I said. "It was part of my work cataloguing the collection. Just doing my job, really. A job that led to you inheriting $47 million, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "That's one hell of a day at the office." I laughed. "When you put it that way, yes. Though I prefer to think of it as historical research that happened to have unexpected personal implications." The article ran 2 days before the event, on the front page of the Courier's Arts and Culture section. Local archivist discovers family fortune, establishes foundation for historical research. The headline was straightforward, factual, and absolutely guaranteed to be seen by everyone in my family's social circle. That afternoon, my phone exploded. 17 missed calls from my mother, 9 from Claire, 4 from my father, dozens of texts, increasingly frantic. "Nina, call me now. What is this article? But why didn't you tell us?" "Nina, this isn't funny. We need to talk immediately. I'm calling Richard Chen." "This must be a mistake. $47 million. You couldn't tell your own family?" I sat on my couch, scrolling through the messages with a detachment that might have worried me if I'd had any emotional energy left to spare. But I didn't. I felt nothing looking at these texts. No guilt, no satisfaction, no anger, just a distant recognition that dominoes were falling exactly as I'd arranged them. I drafted a single text message and sent it to all 3 of them. "I'll be at the Beaumont Gallery on Saturday at 7 p.m. for the foundation launch. You're welcome to attend if you'd like to learn more about my work. Otherwise, I hope you found the article informative." Then I turned off my phone completely. The next 2 days, I worked in blessed silence, making final preparations for the event. My dress, a deep emerald velvet that fit like it had been made for me because it had hung in my closet. My speech was written, revised, and memorized. The caterers were confirmed, the venue was set, the guest list was finalized. Everything was ready. On Friday night, I allowed myself one moment of doubt. I sat in my reading chair with a cup of tea and thought about what I was about to do. About the fact that after tomorrow night, there would be no going back. My family would know everything. The story I'd been living in private would become public. The distance between us would become permanent. And I thought, good, because the truth was, we'd never been close. We'd been people who shared DNA and a last name and occasional holiday meals, but we'd never been family in any way that mattered. And I was tired, so tired, of pretending otherwise, of carrying the weight of their disappointment and my own hope that things might change. They wouldn't change. They were who they are. And I finally, was ready to be who I actually was. Saturday dawned clear and cold, the kind of November day where the sky is impossibly blue and the air tastes like possibility. I spent the morning in careful preparation, not just getting ready for an event, but getting ready for a transformation. The final shedding of a skin I'd been growing out of for years. At 5 p.m. I started getting dressed. The emerald velvet slid over my skin like water, like armor, like a declaration. I'd had my hair done that afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just styled in a way that made me feel polished, professional, powerful. Minimal makeup, pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother on my father's side before she died, and no one thought to ask if I wanted anything of hers. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. Not because I looked different, but because I looked like myself. Fully, completely, unapologetically myself. My phone, which I'd turned back on that morning, showed 43 new messages. I didn't read them. I did send one text to Dr. Hartford. "Ready when you are." Her response came immediately. "You've got this. See you at 6:30. I arrived at the Beaumont Gallery at 6:15 before most of the guests. The space had been transformed. Soft lighting, elegant displays showcasing some of the historical documents we'd be working with. Banners with the Foundation's logo, cocktail tables arranged to encourage mingling. A small stage at one end where I'd give my speech. Everything was perfect. Evelyn Hartford arrived right on schedule, looking sharp in a navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. She'd become such an important part of this journey, and seeing her there made something settle in my chest. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Surprisingly calm," I said, and it was true. "Good, because your family just pulled up." I turned toward the entrance and saw them through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My mother, father, Claire, and Marcus, all dressed like they were attending a state dinner. My mother was gesturing animatedly. Claire looked furious. My father just looked confused. "Right on time?" I murmured. "Do you want me to run interference?" Evelyn asked. "No," I said. "Let them come. They were about to get a very thorough education." They spotted me immediately. Of course they did. I was standing near the entrance, greeting early arrivals, looking nothing like the diminished version of myself they'd seen 2 weeks ago at my birthday dinner. My mother reached me first, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nina, what is this? Why didn't you tell us?" "Tell you what?" I asked pleasantly. "Don't play games," Claire hissed, catching up. She looked around the gallery like she was cataloguing everything, her lawyer instincts in full effect. "The article, the foundation, the money, when were you planning to mention any of this?" "I wasn't," I said simply. "Why would I?" My father stepped forward, and for the first time in my memory, he looked uncertain. "Nina, this is a family matter. Surely you understand that we should have been informed." "A family matter," I repeated, and I let the words hang in the air for a moment. "That's interesting, because 2 weeks ago, at my birthday dinner, you all made it very clear that you wished I wasn't part of the family at all." My mother's face paled. "Nina, that was just... Claire didn't mean..." "She did mean it," I interrupted quietly. "And you all laughed. So let's not rewrite history. That's my job, professionally speaking, and I'm very good at it. More guests were arriving now, and I could see my family becoming aware of the audience. The mayor of Hartford was shaking hands near the door. The director of Yale's library was examining one of the displays. A state senator was accepting a glass of the wine from a passing server. "We need to talk," Claire said through gritted teeth. "Privately." "We really don't," I replied. "But you're welcome to stay for the event. It starts in about 20 minutes. There's wine, and the shrimp puffs are excellent." I turned away from them and moved toward a group of arriving guests. Scholars from the Historical Society, archivists from across New England, people whose respect I'd earned through years of careful work. Behind me, I could feel my family's shock radiating like heat. Evelyn appeared at my elbow. "That was masterful," she murmured. "That was easy," I corrected. "The hard part comes next." The gallery filled steadily over the next 20 minutes. By 7 p.m., there were easily 200 people in attendance, far more than we'd expected. The Courier article had generated buzz, and apparently, everyone wanted to see the archivist who'd stumbled into a fortune and decided to give it all away to historical research. My family had retreated to a corner, huddled together like refugees from a life they thought they understood. I watched them occasionally, noting the way my mother kept glancing at her phone, probably checking social media to see who was here, who was witnessing this. The way Claire was scanning the room, seeing all the people she knew from various professional and social circles, realizing that by Monday morning, everyone would know that her disappointing sister was now the most talked about philanthropist in Connecticut. At exactly 7:15, Evelyn stepped onto the small stage and called for attention. The crowd quieted, glasses lowered, faces turned expectantly toward the front. "Good evening," Evelyn began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "Thank you all for being here tonight. We're celebrating not just the launch of a new foundation, but a testament to what happens when passion meets persistence, when historical research reveals not just the past, but possibilities for the future." She spoke for a few minutes about the Foundation's mission, about the importance of preserving and democratizing access to historical archives. Then she said the words I'd been simultaneously anticipating and dreading. "It's my honor to introduce you to the founder and director of the Nina Thorne Foundation for Historical Research, Dr. Nina Thorne." The room burst into applause. I stepped onto the stage, and from this vantage point, I could see everyone. The respected scholars applauding warmly, the cultural leaders leaning forward with interest, the journalists taking notes, and in the back corner my family, frozen in various expressions of disbelief. "Thank you," I said, waiting for the applause to fade. "And thank you, Evelyn, though I should note that the doctor is a bit premature. I won't defend my dissertation until next spring." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. My family's faces registered this new information like a sap. Another thing they didn't know, and another entire dimension of my life they'd been oblivious to. 3 years ago, I continued, I was asked to evaluate a private collection of historical documents. It was supposed to be a routine consulting job, 6 months maybe, cataloguing letters and records that had been sitting untouched for decades. Instead, it became a journey that would change my life in ways I never could have anticipated. I told them the story, not the personal story. I wasn't here for confession or catharsis. I told them about the Whitmore archives, about the discovery process, About the moment I realized I was looking at evidence of a multi-generational trust that had been lost to family memory. I talked about the legal and historical research required to verify the connection, about working with attorneys and financial historians to trace a line of inheritance spanning 134 years. Historical research, I said, is often thought of as backward-looking. We study the past, we preserve old documents. We're accused, sometimes fairly, of being more interested in what was than what is or could be. I paused, looking directly at the section where my family stood. But history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding how we got here, what was lost along the way, and what might still be recovered. Sometimes that recovery is metaphorical, understanding our cultural heritage, learning from previous mistakes. And sometimes, I smiled slightly, it's very literal. Sometimes you find $47 million that everyone thought was gone forever. The room erupted in laughter and applause. I waited for it to settle. That money could have gone a lot of ways. I could have kept it private, invested it conservatively, lived a comfortable life on the interest. No one would have blamed me, but I kept coming back to the question of how I found it in the first place. I found it because someone, multiple someones actually, believed that historical preservation mattered enough to fund positions like mine. Someone gave me access to archives, to education, to mentorship. Someone decided that dusty old papers were worth paying people to care about. I saw my father flinch at dusty old papers. Good. He should remember saying that. This foundation, I continued, is my way of continuing that chain. We'll be funding archival projects across New England, providing grants for researchers, digitizing collections to make them freely available online, and training the next generation of historians and archivists. We'll be preserving the stories that might otherwise be lost, not because they're famous or glamorous, but because they're true, and truth has value even when it's not immediately profitable. I spoke for another 10 minutes, outlining specific initiatives, introducing board members, thanking partners and supporters. Through it all, I maintained my professional composure, my researcher's clarity, my archivist's precision. But I also made sure to mention casually but clearly that I'd been working on this project for 3 years while maintaining my position at the Historical Society, that I'd completed my coursework for a PhD in American history at Yale, that I'd published papers in academic journals, presented at conferences, built a reputation in my field that existed entirely separate from my family name or their connections. Every mention was another brick in the wall of truth I was building. Another piece of evidence that the life they dismissed as insignificant was, in fact, substantial and meaningful and completely self-created. When I finished my speech, the applause was thunderous. People stood. I saw Richard Chen from the Historical Society with tears in his eyes. The Yale Library director was grinning. Even the state senator looked impressed. And my family? They looked like they'd been hit by a truck. I stepped off the stage and was immediately surrounded by well-wishers. Congratulations, questions about the foundation's work, requests for collaboration. I moved through the crowd with practiced grace, answering thoughtfully, making connections, being exactly what I'd spent years becoming, a respected professional in my field. At some point, I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to find my mother, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Nina," she said quietly, "please, can we talk?" I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd given birth to me but never quite figured out how to be my mother. Who'd spent 31 years comparing me unfavorably to my sister. Finding me wanting, wishing I was different. "What would you like to talk about?" I asked. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. All of this. She gestured vaguely at the gallery. "The money? The foundation? Your doctorate? Why didn't you tell us?" "When would I have told you?" I asked. "At my birthday dinner, when Claire was explaining how I'd never done anything worth celebrating. Or maybe at Christmas 2 years ago, when Dad introduced me to his golf partners as our other daughter, the one with the book job. Or perhaps at Claire's baby shower, when you told everyone that at least one of your daughters had given you something to be proud of." My mother's face crumpled. "We didn't mean—" "You did mean it," I said, and my voice was gentle but implacable. "That's the thing you need to understand. You meant all of it. Every dismissal, every comparison, every moment of making me feel like my life was less valuable because it didn't look like Claire's. You meant it all. And I spent years trying to convince myself you didn't. Trying to believe that if I just proved myself enough, you'd see me." "We're your family," she whispered. "No," I said. "You're people I'm related to. There's a difference." Claire appeared beside our mother, and she looked furious in a way I recognized, the anger of someone who's losing a narrative they'd relied on. "This is unbelievable. You let us think you were barely getting by, living in that tiny apartment, working at a non-profit for peanuts." "I do live in that apartment," I interrupted. "I do, or did, work at the Historical Society." "None of that was a lie, Claire. I just didn't share everything else because you'd made it abundantly clear you weren't interested in my life unless it gave you something to mock." "That's not fair," she snapped. "We're your family. We had a right to know. You had a right to nothing," I said. And for the first time, I let a bit of steel into my voice. "You didn't earn knowledge about my life. You didn't show interest in my work or my dreams or my accomplishments. You laughed when I told you I was getting my master's. You asked what the point was when I started my PhD. You've spent years making it clear that nothing I did would ever be good enough. So no, Claire, you didn't have a right to know. You had the opportunity to know, and you chose mockery instead, didn't you?" My father had joined us now, and he looked older somehow, diminished. "Nina, this isn't how families work. You can't just cut us out." "I'm not cutting you out," I said. "I'm acknowledging that you cut me out years ago. I'm just finally accepting it." "We made mistakes," my mother tried again. "We could have been more supportive, more understanding. You could have been human," I said quietly. "You could have shown basic kindness. You could have not laughed when Claire said you wished I'd never been born." The four of them went silent. Around us, the party continued. Conversations and laughter and the clink of glasses. But in our small circle, there was just heavy, awful silence. "That was wrong," my mother said finally. "Claire, tell her." "Tell her what?" Claire's voice was brittle. "That I'm sorry she overreacted to a joke." I laughed. Actually laughed. "A joke? That's what we're calling it?" "What do you want, Nina?" Claire demanded. "An apology? Fine. I'm sorry you took it so seriously. I'm sorry you're so sensitive that you can't handle family banter. I'm sorry—" "Stop," I said, holding up my hand. I don't want your apology. I don't want anything from any of you. I want you to understand that your actions have consequences, and one of those consequences is that I'm done. With the family dinners I wasn't welcome at anyway. With the holidays, where I was an afterthought. With the birthday celebrations where my presence was tolerated rather than celebrated. You are overreacting, my father said, but there was no conviction in it. Am I? I met his eyes. 3 years, Dad. 3 years I've been working on this project, building this foundation, completing a doctorate. 3 years of having probably the most significant experience of my life. And in all that time, did you once ask me how I was doing? Did you once show interest in my work, beyond dismissing it as a hobby? He didn't answer. We both knew the truth. The saddest part, I said, speaking to all of them now, is that I would have shared this with you. If you'd ever shown that you cared, if you'd ever treated me like I mattered, I would have been so excited to tell you everything. About the discovery, about the research, about how it felt to connect with history in such a personal way. I would have loved to have you be part of this. Then let us be part of it now, my mother pleaded. We can start over. No, I said simply. We can't. Because this isn't about one bad joke at one birthday dinner. This is about 31 years of being made to feel less than. And I'm not angry anymore. I really am not. I'm just done. A woman approached us then, one of the museum directors I'd been hoping to connect with. Nina, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to discuss the possibility of collaboration. Of course, I said warmly, relieved for the escape. I turned back to my family one last time. I need to get back to my guests. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. I walked away, and I didn't look back. For the next 2 hours, I worked the room with focus and purpose. I made connections, discussed potential projects, answered questions about the foundation's work. I introduced board members to potential donors, scholars to institutional partners, researchers to resources they didn't know existed. I was good at this. I'd always been good at this, at building relationships based on shared interests and mutual respect. I'd just never been able to do it with my family, because they'd never respected what I cared about enough to build on. Around 9:30, I saw them leave. My mother was crying. My father had his arm around her. Claire was walking ahead of them, spine rigid, Marcus trailing behind, looking uncomfortable. They didn't say goodbye. When the door closed behind them, Evelyn appeared at my side. How are you holding up? Surprisingly well, I said. And it was true. I felt lighter, somehow, clearer. What they said to you earlier, I couldn't hear all of it, but I saw your face. Are you okay? I'm better than okay, I said. I just did something I should have done years ago. I told the truth. The event wound down around 10 p.m. The guests filtered out with promises of future collaboration, invitations to lunch, requests for follow-up meetings. By 10:30, it was just me and Evelyn and the catering staff cleaning up. So, Evelyn said, accepting a glass of leftover wine from one of the servers. What now? I thought about the question. About my empty apartment waiting for me. About the fact that tomorrow morning I wouldn't be going to the Historical Society. About how my phone was probably already filling up with messages from my family. Messages I had no intention of reading. Now, I said, I do the work. That's what this was always about. Not revenge, not proving anything to them. Just doing work that matters. You know they're going to keep trying to contact you, Evelyn said gently. I know, I said, and I'll keep not responding. Eventually, they'll get the message. Or they won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. We stood there for a moment, watching the caterers pack up, the soft clink of plates and glasses like a gentle percussion. The gallery felt enormous suddenly, full of space and possibility. Thank you, I said to Evelyn, for everything. For believing in this. For helping me build it. For being in my corner when I didn't have many people there. You had more people than you realized, she said. Richard, the board members, your colleagues, they all believed in you, Nina. Your family's blindness wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their limitations. I nodded, feeling something tight in my chest start to loosen. I think I'm finally starting to believe that. We said goodbye around 11. I drove home through empty streets, the city quiet and clean, under a nearly full moon. My apartment welcomed me with familiar comfort. My books, my chair, my plants, all exactly where I'd left them. I made tea and sat in my reading chair and allowed myself to feel everything I'd been holding back all night. Not sadness exactly, not regret. More like completion. Like I'd been carrying a story that wasn't mine to carry, and I'd finally set it down. Like I'd been trying to force myself into a narrative that didn't fit, and I'd finally accepted that the answer wasn't to change myself. It was to write a different story entirely. My phone buzzed. Despite myself, I checked it. 17 new messages, all from my family. I opened my laptop instead and pulled up the foundation's planning documents. So much work ahead. Archives to digitize, researchers to fund, projects to launch. A whole life to build that had nothing to do with proving myself to people who would never see me clearly. I worked until 2 a.m., making notes and sending emails and feeling more energized than I had in months. When I finally went to bed, I fell asleep, thinking not about what I'd left behind, but about what I was building. And I didn't dream about my family at all. The call came 2 weeks later on a Tuesday morning while I was in a meeting with potential foundation partners, and I'd been expecting it, honestly. Not the specific timing or the exact nature of it, but something. Because silence, real silence, the kind where you completely remove yourself from people's lives, has a way of forcing confrontation. My family had texted, called, even sent emails to my old work address. I'd responded to none of it. My phone was on silent during the meeting, but I saw it light up repeatedly. Same unknown number calling again and again with the insistence of someone who believes their urgency overrides your boundaries. When the meeting ended, successfully, with a commitment to partner on digitizing a significant collection of labor history documents, I stepped outside and checked my voicemail alarm. 8 new messages. The first 7 were from my mother, each increasingly frantic. Nina, please call me back. It's important. Nina, I know you're angry, but you need to call me. It's about your father. This isn't about us, Nina. There's a real problem. Please. For God's sake, Nina, pick up your phone. The tone shifted from pleading to angry, to desperate and back again, and I found myself unmoved by all of it. Emergencies in my family had always been defined by their convenience, their urgency, never mine. I was about to delete them all when I got to the 8th message. This one wasn't from my mother. It was from Marcus, Claire's husband, and he sounded genuinely distressed. "Nina, it's Marcus. I'm sorry to call, and I know you're not taking calls from your family, but this is serious. Your father's business is under investigation by the SEC. Your parents could lose everything, the house, their retirement, all of it. And Claire and we're implicated too because of some investments he recommended. I'm not asking for money. I just thought you should know your mother she's not doing well. None of us are. Call me back if you can, Dizen." I stood there on the street, phone in hand, and felt absolutely nothing. No panic, no concern, no instinct to rush to their aid, just a distant clinical curiosity about what exactly my father had done. I called Evelyn instead of calling Marcus back. "I got a message from my family," I said, when she answered. "Apparently, there's some kind of CC investigation. My father's business?" A pause. "Hold on." I heard typing, the click of a mouse, then a low whistle. "Oh, Nina? This is not good. Tell me." "It's all over the financial news this morning. Your father's investment firm is being investigated for securities fraud. Apparently, he's been operating what amounts to a small-scale Ponzi scheme for about 5 years, using new investor money to pay returns to existing investors while pocketing substantial fees for himself." I closed my eyes. Of course. Of course, this was how it would go. How bad? Potentially very bad. If the SEC's preliminary findings are accurate, he could be looking at criminal charges, asset seizure, civil penalties, and anyone who invested with him, including family members who he convinced to buy in, they're likely to lose most or all of their investments. "Claire and Marcus," I said. "Probably. And your mother, if she has separate accounts that were invested through the firm. Nina, this could wipe them out." I should have felt something. Sympathy. Horror. Even satisfaction. Instead, I felt like I was reading about strangers in the newspaper. These were people who'd hurt me, dismissed me, wished I'd never been born. And now they were facing consequences for my father's choices, choices that had nothing to do with me. "What do I do?" I asked. "Do?" Evelyn's voice was gentle. "Nina, you don't have to do anything. This isn't your responsibility." "They're going to ask me for help," I said. "For money, almost certainly. Should I help them?" Another pause. "That's not a legal question. That's the question about what kind of person you want to be. And what kind of relationship, if any, you want with these people going forward." I thanked Evelyn and hung up, then stood there for a long moment, thinking. The old Nina, the one who existed even 3 months ago, would have called immediately, would have offered help, tried to fix it, thrown money at the problem because that's what you're supposed to do for family, because blood is thicker than water, because you don't abandon people in crisis, because that's what good daughters do. But I wasn't that Nina anymore. I walked back to the Foundation's temporary office space. We were between locations, having outgrown the initial setup faster than expected, and made a pot of coffee. Then I sat down and did what I did best: research. It took me 3 hours to piece together the full story, pulling from financial news sites, SEC filings, and some discreet calls to contacts in the finance world who owed me favors. The picture that emerged was damning. My father, Gregory Thorne, had run a boutique investment firm for 15 years. It had started legitimately enough, managing portfolios for high net worth individuals, providing financial planning services. But about 5 years ago, after a series of bad investments and market losses, he'd started a second fund. He'd pitched it to existing clients and their friends as an exclusive opportunity with guaranteed returns of 12 to 15% annually. Those returns were fictional. He'd been using new investor money to pay the promised returns to early investors, keeping the scheme going through a combination of charm, reputation, and increasingly desperate recruiting. He'd brought in friends, business associates, and yes, family members. Claire and Marcus had invested almost $200, encouraged by my father's assurances that this was a sure thing. My mother had put in her inheritance from her parents, and the house of cards had started collapsing 3 weeks ago when a major investor wanted to cash out. My father hadn't had the funds to cover it. The investor got suspicious, started asking questions, eventually filed a complaint with the SEC. The investigation had moved quickly. They'd frozen his accounts, seized records, and were building a case that would likely result in criminal charges. My father was going to prison. Almost certainly. My family was going to lose everything. Almost certainly. And I had the resources to help them, easily. $47 million meant I could write a check for whatever they needed, could hire the best lawyers, could make this all go away in terms of financial impact, even if the legal consequences remained. I could save them. The question was, should I? I sat there with my coffee, watching the afternoon light angle through the windows, and I thought about mercy and justice and what I owed to people who'd never shown me either. My phone rang. My mother again. This time I answered. "Nina," she gasped, as if she'd been holding her breath for 2 weeks. "Oh, thank God! Thank God! Did Marcus reach you? Did you hear?" "I heard," I said calmly. "I've been reading about it. It sounds serious." "Serious?" Her voice cracked. "Nina, it's catastrophic. Your father could go to prison. We're going to lose the house. Claire and Marcus lost their entire savings. Everything we've built. Everything we worked for. Everything Dad stole." I corrected quietly. Silence. "Nina, he made mistakes. He ran a Ponzi scheme, Mom. He defrauded people, including his own family. That's not a mistake. That's a crime." "Don't," she said, and now her voice was sharp with something like anger. "Don't you dare judge him. You don't understand the pressure he was under, the expectations, the market conditions. I understand that he chose to commit fraud rather than admit he'd made bad investments," I said. "I understand that he put your financial security and Claire's at risk to protect his ego. I understand that he broke the law repeatedly over years." "We need help," she said, abandoning the defense. "Nina, we need help. You have money now, you have resources." "I have a foundation," I interrupted, "dedicated to historical research and preservation." "You have $47 million, which is committed to specific purposes," I said. "I've made grants, established partnerships, hired staff. I can't just redirect foundation money to personal use. That would be illegal too." "But you must have something. Your own money, personal accounts." "Some," I admitted. Though much less than you probably think. Most of the trust funds the foundation directly. Nina. My mother's voice broke. Please. I'm begging you. We'll lose everything. Your father needs a lawyer, a real lawyer, not some public defender. Claire and Marcus need help recovering their investment. I need somewhere to live. The SEC is going to seize the house. I closed my eyes. Imagined my mother, probably sitting in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, surrounded by the artifacts of a life that was about to disappear. Imagined Claire, furious and scared, watching her perfect life crack. Imagined my father, finally facing consequences for something he couldn't charm or buy his way out of. And I felt nothing. Maybe that should have scared me, that absence of feeling. But it didn't. It felt like freedom. I can't help you, I said quietly. Can't or won't? Both, I said. I can't redirect foundation money, and I won't use my personal resources to bail Dad out of consequences for his own actions. He's your father, she cried. He's a man who laughed when my sisters said she wished I'd never been born, I replied. He's a man who spent my entire life making me feel worthless, because I didn't want to be a lawyer or a banker or whatever would have made him proud. He's a man who's now facing consequences for committing fraud, and I don't owe him rescue. What about me? She asked desperately. What about Claire? We didn't do this. No, I agreed, but you also didn't value me when everything was fine. You don't get to discover I matter only now that I have something you need. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair, Mom. It wasn't fair that I spent 31 years trying to earn love from people who thought my life was a joke. It's not fair that Dad defrauded innocent people. It's not fair that Claire and Marcus lost their savings. But fair isn't the same as my responsibility. So that's it. Her voice was thick with tears. You're just going to let us lose everything? You're not losing everything, I said. You're losing money and property. You still have each other. You still have your health. You'll rebuild. People do after this kind of thing. It won't be comfortable. But you'll survive. How can you be so cold? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized she genuinely didn't understand. To her, this was cruelty. A daughter abandoning her family in crisis. But from where I stood, it was just boundaries. Finally, after 31 years, I was treating them the way they'd always treated me, as people whose problems weren't mine to solve. I'm not being cold, I said. I'm being clear. I'm not responsible for fixing this. And honestly, even if I wanted to help, I'm not sure I should. Dad needs to face consequences. You and Claire need to understand that actions have repercussions. Maybe this is what it takes for that to sink in. I don't believe you're saying this, she whispered. I don't believe my own daughter. Has been your daughter in name only, I finished. Mum, be honest. When was the last time you treated me like I mattered? When was the last time you called Kid just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you showed interest in my life without judgment or dismissal? She didn't answer. You don't get to call me your daughter now that it's convenient, I said softly. You don't get to claim family bonds you never bothered to build. I'm sorry this is happening to you. I genuinely am. But I'm not your solution. Nina? I have to go, I said. I hope Dad gets a fair trial. I hope you find somewhere to land. I hope Claire and Marcus recover. But I can't be the one who makes that happen. I hung up before she could respond, and I sat there in the quiet office, my heart beating normally, my hands steady, no tears pricking at my eyes. I'd meant what I said. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was simply refusing to rescue them from consequences they'd earned, the same way they'd refused to celebrate me for accomplishments I'd earned. It was, in its own way, a kind of equality. My phone rang again immediately. Claire, this time. I let it go to voicemail. Then Marcus. Voicemail. Then my father, calling from a number I didn't recognize. Voicemail. Then my mother again. Voicemail. I turned my phone off and went back to work. Over the next week, the voicemails piled up. I listened to them once, made notes of the key points, then archived them. My father's messages alternated between contrition and anger. He was sorry, he'd made mistakes, but also I was being unreasonable. I had resources and refusing to help was cruel. Claire's messages were pure fury. I was a selfish bitch. I'd always been jealous of her. This was my revenge for perceived slights. I'd regret this. Marcus's messages were the most measured, essentially asking if there was any amount I'd consider providing, any help I might offer, acknowledging they had no right to ask, but asking anyway. My mother's messages were the hardest to listen to. They were raw, desperate, full of tears and pleading and occasional flashes of the manipulation I'd grown up with. If you ever loved us, what would your grandmother think? How can you sleep at night? I slept fine. The story broke wider in the second week. The Hartford Courier ran a feature piece on the scandal, noting with particular interest that Gregory Thorne's daughter had recently established a major foundation, but had apparently declined to help her family in crisis. The article was carefully worded. They couldn't say I'd refused outright without quotes, but the implication was clear. Some people understood. She's not obligated to bail out a fraudster, one comment read. Blood doesn't mean you have to enable crime. Others were less sympathetic. Family is family. This is heartless. She has millions and won't help her own parents. Cold. I didn't respond to any of it. The foundation issued a brief statement through our PR firm. Miss Thorne's personal family matters are separate from the foundation's mission and work. We remain committed to historical preservation and research, and we hope this situation resolves fairly for all involved. Professional, distant, clear. Evelyn called me every few days to check in. How are you holding up? Honestly, I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. No regrets. No, I said, and I meant it. I keep waiting to feel guilty or sad or something, but I just don't. I feel free. That's healthy, she said. Contrary to what some people might think, you're not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. The investigation moved forward. My father was formally charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. He pled not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. His lawyer, a decent but not spectacular attorney he could actually afford, was negotiating a plea deal. My mother moved in with Claire and Marcus, who'd downsized to a smaller rental house. The family home was seized and sold at auction. My father's assets were liquidated to pay restitution to defrauded investors, and I continued building the foundation. We digitized our first major collection, making 50,000 historical documents freely available online. We funded 3 new archival positions at institutions across New England. We hosted a symposium on historical preservation that drew scholars from across the country. I was doing exactly what I'd set out to do. The work was meaningful, challenging, fulfilling. I came home exhausted most days. But it was the good kind of exhaustion. The kind that comes from building something rather than fighting against dismissal. 3 weeks after my mother's first call, I got a message from someone I didn't expect. Sophie's daycare teacher. Miss Thorne, this is Amanda Chen from Little Learners. I got your number from the contact sheet, and I'm reaching out because I'm concerned about Sophie. She's mentioned that her mommy is very sad lately, that her grandpa is in trouble, and that her Aunt Nina doesn't love them anymore. I'm sure there's context I'm missing, but I wanted you to know what she's processing. If you'd like to talk, please call me. I sat with that message for a long time. Sophie, my niece, 3 years old, and caught in the middle of adult disasters she couldn't possibly understand. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was innocent in all of this. And that, finally, cracked something open in my chest. I called Amanda Chen back. Thank you for reaching out, I said. You're right that there's context. My family and I have had a serious falling out, and my father is facing criminal charges. I've chosen to distance myself from the adults in the family, but Sophie didn't choose any of this. Would you be willing to see her? Amanda asked gently. Not at their house, obviously, but maybe at a park or for ice cream. I think it might help her to understand that you don't hate her, even if things are complicated with her parents. I thought about 3-year-old Sophie, trying to make sense of why her aunt had disappeared, wondering if she'd done something wrong, building narratives that might shape how she understood relationships for the rest of her life. Yes, I said. I'd like that. The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday, at a park halfway between New Haven and Hartford. Amanda facilitated, which I appreciated. It kept things neutral, focused on Sophie rather than family drama. Sophie ran to me when she saw me, 3-year-old arms wrapping around my legs with complete, uncomplicated affection. Aunt Nina, you came. I knelt down to her level, feeling something tight in my throat. Of course I came, sweetheart. I missed you. Mommy said you were mad at us, Sophie said, her little face serious. Are you still mad? I'm not mad at you, I said carefully. Your mommy and I are having grown-up problems, but that has nothing to do with you. You didn't do anything wrong, Ed. Promise. I promise. We spent an hour at the park. Sophie showed me how she could go across the monkey bars now, how she'd learned to pump her legs on the swing. She told me about preschool and her best friend Emma and the new cat her family had adopted. And I realized I could do this. I could maintain a relationship with Sophie without being in relationship with my family. She deserved that. She deserved to know that love doesn't have to be all or nothing, that you can set boundaries with adults while still showing up for children. When it was time to go, Sophie hugged me tightly. Will you come back? She asked. If it's okay with your mom and dad. Yes, I said. Maybe once a month, we can meet at the park or get ice cream. And I can tell you about school Leden, and you can tell me about school. I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Connected. Not to my family, but to this small person who shared my blood, but didn't yet share my history. Who still saw me as someone worth loving. I emailed Claire that night. I'd like to maintain a relationship with Sophie, separate from whatever is happening with the adults in this situation. I'm proposing supervised visits once a month at neutral locations. She deserves to have family who shows up for her. And I want to be that person even if I can't be that for you. Let me know if you're willing to arrange this. She responded 2 days later. Fine. But don't think this makes us okay. You abandoned us when we needed you most, and Sophie will learn that eventually. I didn't respond. Let Claire think what she wanted. I'd show up for Sophie, and Sophie would make her own judgments when she was old enough to understand nuance. The call came from an unknown number on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the SEC investigation became public. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Nina Thorne? A woman's voice. Professional, but strained. Yes. This is Sandra Martinez from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'm calling regarding the case against Gregory Thorne. We understand you're his daughter. My heart rate picked up slightly, but my voice stayed calm. That's correct. I'm reaching out because we've become aware of certain discrepancies in Mr. Thorne's testimony. He's claimed that he consulted with you about financial matters and that you encouraged some of the investment strategies he pursued. We need to verify whether that's accurate. I felt my jaw tighten. Of course. Of course, my father was trying to implicate me, to spread the blame to avoid full responsibility. That's completely false, I said. I haven't had meaningful communication with my father in years, and we've certainly never discussed his business practices. I work in historical research, not finance. We suspected as much, Martinez said. But we need to document this for the record. Would you be willing to give a formal statement? Yes, I said immediately. When? How's Thursday afternoon? The U.S. Attorney's office was in downtown Hartford, in a building that looked like every federal building I'd ever seen. All concrete and security checkpoints and fluorescent lighting. I'd brought Evelyn with me, not because I needed a lawyer for my own actions, but because I wanted a witness to whatever happened. Sandra Martinez was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of competence that comes from dealing with liars for a living. She led us to a conference room and set up recording equipment. Thank you for coming in, she said. I want to be clear. You're not under investigation. We just need to establish the accuracy of your father's claims. What exactly did he claim? I asked. She pulled out a document, scanned it, then read. He stated, and I quote, "My daughter Nina has substantial expertise in historical research and authentication, and I consulted with her regarding the legitimacy of certain investment opportunities. She provided assurances that helped inform my recommendations to clients." I stared at her. That's an incredibly creative interpretation of reality. So you didn't provide such assurances? I had no knowledge of his investment practices, I said firmly. The last substantive conversation I had with my father about anything professional was probably 5 years ago, and it consisted of him telling me my career was a waste of time. Can you document the distance in your relationship? Extensively, I said. I pulled out my phone, pulled up my email archive. I've been keeping records since my family and I had a serious falling out. I can show you that there's been virtually no communication between us and certainly nothing about investments or business. I spent the next hour walking through my timeline. The birthday dinner, the foundation launch, the months of silence before the SEC investigation. I showed her my email archive, my phone records, even text messages that demonstrated the nature of my relationship with my father. He's lying, I said simply. He's trying to spread blame, to make it seem like I had some role in his decisions. But I didn't. I wouldn't have even if he'd asked. I have no expertise in investment strategies, and I've been pretty consistently disgusted by the kind of wealth management he did. Martinez took notes throughout, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "Off the record?" she said. "I believed you before you walked in. Your father's trying to dilute his culpability, and he apparently thought throwing his daughter under the bus would help. But his story has holes everywhere, and your documentation is airtight." "Will this affect his case?" Evelyn asked. "It'll affect his credibility," Martinez said, "which is already pretty shot, but this doesn't help. Lying to federal prosecutors about family involvement isn't a great look when you're already facing fraud charges." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because my father's attempt to implicate me had failed. Sadness because he'd tried in the first place. "Miss Thorne?" Martinez said, as we were preparing to leave. "I know this is probably difficult. Family situations always are, especially in white-collar cases. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call in maintaining distance." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." On the way out, Evelyn turned to me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I am, actually. It's almost clarifying. Like, I knew my father was self-centered, but trying to implicate me in federal crimes takes it to a new level. It makes it easier to remember why I made the choices I made." "He's going to prison," Evelyn said quietly. "The plea deal is falling apart. With this added evidence of dishonesty, the prosecution is pushing for a longer sentence." "How long?" 8 to 12 years, probably." I processed that. My father, who was currently 63, would be in his 70s when he got out. He'd miss everything. Sophie's childhood, any other grandchildren, the prime years of retirement he'd been so focused on securing, and I felt not happy exactly, but something like peace, like the universe was balancing itself. That night, my phone rang. The caller ID said Claire Moby Aitzes. I answered. "You testified against him." Her voice was shaking with rage. "You went to the US attorney and testified against your own father." "I gave a statement," I corrected. "Because he lied and tried to implicate me in his crimes. He was trying to save himself. By throwing me under the bus," I said. "Claire, he literally told federal prosecutors that I encouraged his fraud. Do you understand what that could have done to me, to my foundation, to my career? You could have lied for him." I actually laughed. "Are you serious? You want me to commit perjury to protect a man who defrauded people, including you? He's our father. He's a criminal, I said flatly, who made choices that hurt a lot of people, including his own family. And now he's facing consequences. That's not my fault, Claire. That's his. Mom is devastated, Claire said. She thought maybe you'd help. Maybe you'd... I'm not helping, I interrupted. I've been clear about that. Dad committed crimes. You and Marcus invested money with him and lost it. Mum tied her financial security to a man who turned out to be a fraud. None of that is my responsibility to fix. You have the money. I have a foundation, I corrected, dedicated to historical research, which is doing incredible work, by the way. We just funded the digitization of the New Haven Labour Archives, making 75,000 documents available to researchers worldwide. We're supporting 3 new PhD candidates studying regional history. We're preserving stories that would otherwise be lost. That's what I'm doing with my resources, Claire. Not bailing out people who laughed when you said you wished I'd never been born. Silence on the other end. That's what this is about, Claire said finally. You're punishing us. No, I said. I'm living my life separate from you. There's a difference. What about Sophie? I'm seeing Sophie once a month, I said. I've made that arrangement with her daycare teacher. She deserves to have family who shows up consistently and doesn't bring drama. I'm being that person for her. You're tearing this family apart. Claire, I said, and I was suddenly very tired. There was no family to tear apart. There were people who shared a last name and occasionally gathered out of obligation. But family, real family, is built on respect and care and showing up for each other. We never had that. We just had proximity and pretense. I can't believe you're saying this. I know, I said. You've never believed me when I tried to explain how your treatment affected me. Why would you start now? I hung up before she could respond, and I blocked her number. Then I blocked my mother's number, then my father's. It was time to stop having these conversations. They weren't productive. They weren't healing. They were just reopening wounds that I was finally allowing to close. 2 days later, I got an email. Not from my family, but from Marcus. The subject line said, I understand. I opened it cautiously. Nina, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About earning knowledge about your life, about showing up, about treating people like they matter. And you're right. We didn't do that. I didn't do that. I was always just peripheral to your family dynamics. I loved Claire, and I went along with how she treated you because it was easier than questioning it. I made jokes at your expense. I didn't ask about your work. I saw you as this minor character in our life rather than a person with her own story. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for anything, actually. I just wanted you to know that I get it now. What you were trying to say. Why you made the choices you made. Claire is furious with you. Your mum is devastated. But I think they're angry because you're holding up a mirror and they don't like what they see. You're making them face the fact that they treated you terribly, and it's easier to blame you for being cold than to acknowledge their own cruelty. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. With the foundation, with setting boundaries, with showing up for Sophie but not for us. You're treating us the way we treated you, like people whose problems aren't your responsibility. I hope the foundation does amazing work. I hope you build a life you're proud of. And I hope someday Sophie understands what you did for her by maintaining a connection, even when it would have been easier to walk away completely. Take care. Marcus. I read the email 3 times, feeling something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. Someone in my family, even peripherally, had actually heard me, had actually understood. I wrote back, Marcus, thank you for this. It means more than you probably realize. I don't hate any of you. I'm not punishing you. I'm just finally treating myself like I matter, which means not sacrificing myself to fix problems I didn't create. I hope you and Claire land on your feet. I hope Sophie grows up knowing she's loved. And I hope eventually everyone finds peace with how things turned out. Nina, I hit send and closed my laptop, and I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The next morning, I got a call from a number that my phone identified as Bridgeport County Jail. I answered, my heart sinking. Hello? You have a collect call from Gregory Thorne. Will you accept the charges? I almost hung up. Should have hung up. But curiosity won. Yes, I said. There was a click. Then my father's voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it. Nina. Dad. Thank you for taking my call. I wasn't sure you would. I'm not sure I should have, I said. What do you want? A long pause. To apologize. For the statement I gave the prosecutors. I was desperate. And I thought if I could spread some of the blame, maybe the sentence would be lighter. But that was wrong. You didn't have anything to do with my business, and I shouldn't have suggested you did. No, I agreed. You shouldn't have. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice cracked. For that and for everything else. For not valuing you. For not supporting your work. For laughing at your birthday. For being a terrible father. I closed my eyes. This was what I'd wanted for years. Acknowledgement, apology, recognition. But now that I had it, it felt empty. Too late. Too motivated by consequences rather than genuine remorse. I appreciate the apology, I said carefully. But Dad, you hurt me for 31 years. You're apologizing now because you're facing prison and you need someone to care about you. That's not the same as actually being sorry. I am sorry, he insisted. I know I was wrong. About your career, about your value, about everything. You've built something remarkable, Nina. I should have seen it sooner. You should have seen me sooner, I corrected. The foundation is just work. What mattered was treating me like I was worth basic respect and kindness. And you never did that. Not when I was 6 and trying to show you my drawings. Not when I was 16 and won an award for my history essay. Not when I was 25 and got my master's degree. You never saw me, Dad. You only see me now because I have something you need. That's not true. It is true, I said firmly. And I'm done pretending otherwise. I'm done making excuses for your behavior. I'm done hoping you'll change. You're 63 years old. If you haven't figured out how to value your daughter by now, you never will. Nina, please. I'm not bailing you out, I said. I'm not hiring you a better lawyer. I'm not providing financial support to Mum. I'm not fixing this. You made choices and you're facing consequences. That's how life works. I'm your father, he said, and there was desperation in his voice now. Doesn't that mean anything? It used to, I said quietly. But you spent my whole life teaching me that it didn't mean anything to you. So no, Dad, it doesn't mean anything anymore. I'll die in prison, he said. I'm 63. An 8-year sentence might as well be life. Then you should have thought about that before you committed fraud, I said. I'm sorry you're scared. I'm sorry you're facing consequences. But I'm not responsible for saving you from yourself. Please. Goodbye, Dad, I said, and I hung up. I sat there for a long time, phone in my hand, waiting to feel something. Guilt, sadness, regret. But I felt only a deep, profound relief. Like I'd been carrying a weight so long I'd forgotten it was there. And I'd finally set it down. My father went to prison 3 months later. The plea deal fell through completely, and he went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted on 7 counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. My mother moved to Florida to live with her sister. Claire and Marcus sold their rental and moved to a smaller place, focused on rebuilding their finances. Sophie started kindergarten, and I continued building the foundation. We grew faster than I'd anticipated. Within a year, we'd funded 15 major archival projects, supported dozens of researchers, and made over 1 million historical documents available online. We'd become a significant force in the field of historical preservation. And I'd become someone known not for my family name, but for my work. I gave talks at conferences, published papers, served on boards, did the work I'd always wanted to do, with resources I'd never imagined having. And every month, I met Sophie at the park. I watched her grow from a 3-year-old who didn't understand why families broke apart into a 5-year-old who was starting to understand that people were complicated, that love didn't always look like fairy tales. "Do you miss Grandpa?" she asked me once as we were sitting on a park bench eating ice cream. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "I miss the grandpa I wished I had. But the one who was actually there? Not so much. Mommy says you were mean to him." "Mommy and I remember things differently," I said carefully. "And that's okay. People can have different experiences of the same events." "But you're not mean," Sophie said with the certainty of a child who hadn't learned to doubt her perceptions yet. "You always show up for our park days. You remember what I tell you. You're nice." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "I try to show up for people who matter to me. And you matter a lot." She leaned against me, getting ice cream on my sleeve, and I felt something settle in my chest. This was family. Not perfect, not traditional, but real, built on consistency and care rather than obligation and blood. 2 years after my birthday dinner, I got a letter. Not an email, but an actual physical letter, forwarded from the Historical Society since I'd never given my family my home address. The return address was Bridgeport County Jail. I held it for a long time before opening it. This piece of paper that represented my father's attempt to reach me from inside the consequences of his own choices. Finally, I opened it. "Dear Nina, I've been in here for 18 months now. I have a lot of time to think, and I've been thinking about what you said the last time we spoke. about how I never saw you. You were right. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I know you've moved on. I know the foundation is doing well. I read about it in the newspaper sometimes. I know you're living the life you built, and I'm glad. I mean that. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I did to you, how I made you feel, why you made the choices you made. I understand that you're not being cruel or vengeful. You're just treating me the way I treated you, like someone whose problems aren't your responsibility. It's a hard lesson to learn at 65, but I'm learning it. I hope you're happy, Nina. I hope you're proud of your work. I hope you're building the life you deserve. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you needed. I'm sorry I laughed when you needed support. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally see you. Too late, but I see you. Love. Dad. I read it twice, then carefully folded it and put it in my desk drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but for the record, for the archive. Because this was part of the story too. The moment when someone finally acknowledged the truth, even if that acknowledgement came too late to change anything. I didn't write back. 3 years after my birthday dinner, the foundation hosted its annual gala, a major fundraising event that had become one of the most anticipated gatherings in Connecticut's cultural calendar. We'd rented out the same gallery where we'd launched, and the space was filled with historians, archivists, donors, and cultural leaders. I gave a speech about our accomplishments. 50 major projects funded, 2 million documents digitized, a new fellowship program for emerging scholars, partnerships with institutions across the country. I talked about the power of historical preservation, about making the past accessible to everyone, about ensuring that stories weren't lost just because they didn't belong to the powerful. And in the middle of that speech, surrounded by people who valued my work and respected my vision, I realized something. I'd built a family, not through blood, but through shared purpose and mutual respect. The board members who showed up consistently, the researchers who trusted me with their projects, the colleagues who collaborated generously, the communities who welcomed our resources. These were my people. This was my family. And I was so much happier than I'd ever been trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. After the gala, I drove to my apartment, a bigger place now, with space for my expanding book collection and a home office where I could work without feeling cramped. I made tea and sat in my reading chair, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie, sent from Claire's phone. Aunt Nina, I got an A on my history project. Can I tell you about it at the park next week? Love, Sophie. I smiled and typed back. I can't wait to hear all about it. See you Saturday. And I thought about the woman who'd sat in this same chair 3 years ago, digesting the cruelty of a birthday dinner, making plans to reveal a truth her family couldn't imagine. She would be proud of me, I thought. Proud of what I'd built, how I'd stood firm, how I'd learned to value myself even when no one else did. My phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Sometime later, I'm not sure how much, the voicemail notification popped up. I didn't listen to it right away. I finished my tea first, watching the lights of New Haven twinkle in the darkness, feeling completely at peace with the life I'd built. Eventually, I played the voicemail. Miss Thorne, This is Detective Sarah Chen from Hartford PD. I'm calling because there's been an incident. Your sister gave us your number as next of kin. We need you to call us back as soon as possible. It's urgent. My heart rate picked up, but I didn't panic. I'd learned over these past 3 years to distinguish between actual emergencies and manufactured urgency designed to force my hand. I called back. Detective Chen? This is Nina Thorne returning your call. Ms. Thorne, thank you for calling back. There's been a situation with your mother. She's been arrested for writing bad checks and credit card fraud. We need to verify some information and discuss. I'm not her next of kin, I interrupted calmly. My sister Claire is closer to her and has power of attorney. She should be your point of contact. Your sister said you might have resources to help with bail. I don't, I said firmly. Detective, I'm estranged from my family. I'm not involved in their financial or legal affairs. Claire is the appropriate contact. I can't help you. But I'm sorry, I said. And I meant it in the abstract way you're sorry when bad things happen to people you used to know. But this isn't something I can assist with. Good luck. I hung up and blocked the number. Then I sent a text to Claire. The police called me about Mom. I told them to contact you. I'm not getting involved. This is your situation to handle. She responded immediately. You're such a fucking bitch. I blocked her number too. I should have done it months ago. And then I sat there in my reading chair, in my comfortable apartment, surrounded by books and plants and the life I'd built, brick by careful brick. And I thought about how far I'd come. From a woman who measured her worth by her family's approval to a woman who measured it by her own standards. From someone who would have dropped everything to rescue people who didn't value her to someone who understood that love without respect was just obligation in disguise. From a daughter desperately seeking validation to a person who'd learned to validate herself. The next morning, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Please read from your mother." I hovered over the delete button for a long moment, then, against my better judgment, opened it. Nina, you've probably heard about my arrest. I'm writing from Claire's computer because they took my phone. I don't know what to do. I can't afford a lawyer. I can't pay the bail. I'm looking at possible jail time for crimes I barely understand I was committing. I know you don't want to hear from me. I know you've moved on. But Nina, I'm your mother. I gave birth to you. I raised you. Doesn't that count for anything? I made mistakes. We all did. But we're family, and family helps each other. You have so much, and I'm asking for so little. Just enough to get a decent lawyer to get through this. I'll pay you back, I promise. Please, Nina, I'm begging you. Mom, I read it once, felt the familiar pull of guilt and obligation trying to reassert itself. And then I did something I'd gotten very good at. I recognized that feeling for what it was. Conditioning, not conscience. And I let it go. I wrote back, Mom, you gave birth to me. You provided food and shelter growing up. Those are things I'm grateful for. But you also spent 31 years making me feel worthless. You laughed when Claire said she wished I'd never been born. You dismissed my career, mocked my life choices, and treated me like a disappointment for the crime of having different interests than you valued. You're asking me to remember you're my mother now that you need something. But you forgot I was your daughter every day when I needed love and support and basic respect. I'm not helping with your legal fees. I'm not bailing you out. I'm not solving this problem. You'll need to work with Claire, or find a public defender, or figure this out the way people without wealthy children figure things out. I don't say this with cruelty. I say it with clarity. I'm not responsible for fixing the consequences of your choices, just like you weren't interested in celebrating the consequences of mine. I hope you find a path forward. I hope this situation resolves in a way that's fair. But I'm not your solution. Take care, Nina. I hit send and felt nothing but relief. 5 years after my 31st birthday, I woke up on a Saturday morning in early autumn. The air coming through my window was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and possibility. I made coffee, fed my cat, a rescue I'd adopted 2 years ago named Archie, and sat in my reading chair, looking out at the New Haven morning. Today was Sophie's 8th birthday party. Not a family dinner at my parents' house. Not a gathering where I'd be tolerated rather than welcomed. But a small celebration I was hosting at a children's museum, just Sophie and 3 of her friends. Because Claire had called me 6 months ago with a request that had surprised us both. Sophie wants Aunt Nina to plan her birthday, Claire had said, her voice tight with something that might have been resentment, or might have been exhaustion. She says, you're the only one who remembers what she likes. I'd paused, weighing the request, the implications, the potential for reopening wounds I'd worked hard to heal. I'll do it, I'd said, but just me and Sophie and a few friends, not a family event. Fine? Claire had said, and hung up before I could say anything else. Now, 5 months later, I was preparing for a party that represented something I never expected. A relationship I'd managed to preserve by setting boundaries rather than sacrificing myself. My phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. Big day, how are you feeling? I smiled and typed back. Surprisingly good. Sometimes setting boundaries actually lets you keep what matters. The party was at 2 p.m. I arrived at 1:30 to set up, and Sophie got there at 1:45, bursting through the door with the kind of enthusiasm only 8-year-olds possess. Aunt Nina! She crashed into me with a hug that nearly knocked me over. This is going to be the best birthday ever. Behind her, Claire stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. We hadn't spoken directly since the email exchange about our mother's arrest. That situation had resolved with Mum taking a plea deal. Probation and restitution for a first-time offence. No jail time but a criminal record, and a lot of community service. Thank you for this, Claire said stiffly. She's my niece, I said simply. I show up for her. Claire nodded, something unreadable crossing her face. She talks about you constantly. About the park days, about the museum trips, about how you listen to her stories about school. She's a remarkable kid, I murmured. She is, Claire agreed. Then, surprising me, you're good with her. Better than we gave you credit for. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't acknowledgement of the years of cruelty or dismissal. But it was something. A crack in the wall, a recognition that maybe, possibly, they'd been wrong about me. I didn't push, didn't demand more. Just nodded. I try to show up consistently. That's what kids need. Claire left, and Sophie and her friends descended on the museum exhibits with the kind of joy that reminded me why I loved working with history. Because stories connect us, teach us, show us who we've been and who we might become. The party was perfect. Sophie loved the dinosaur exhibit, Loved the hands-on archaeology dig. Loved the birthday cake I'd ordered from a local bakery with her favorite characters on it. At the end, when her friends had been picked up, and it was just the two of us waiting for Claire, Sophie looked up at me with those serious 8-year-old eyes. "Aunt Nina, why don't you come to family dinners anymore?" I'd known this question would come eventually. Sophie was getting old enough to understand that something was missing, that the family structure she'd grown up with had a conspicuous gap. I knelt down to her level. "You know how sometimes people don't get along, even though they're related? Like me and Billy Murphy at school." "Kind of like that," I said. "Your mum and grandma and I. We had some grown-up disagreements. And sometimes the healthiest thing is to have space from each other." "But you still love me?" "Always," I said firmly. "Sophie, you are important to me. I show up for you because you matter, not because of your mum or grandma or anybody else. You and me, we're good. This is our relationship, separate from all that other stuff." "Okay," she said, then added, "Mommy says you got rich and forgot about us." I felt something tighten in my chest, but kept my voice calm. "That's not what happened, sweetheart. I started a foundation to help preserve history, and I made different choices about how to spend my time and resources. But I didn't forget about you. I see you every month, remember? Sometimes more." "Yeah, but," Sophie said, brightening. "And you never cancel?" "Never," I confirmed. Claire arrived to pick Sophie up, and Sophie chattered the whole way to the car about the exhibits and the cake, and how this was definitely her best birthday yet. Claire gave me a nod that might have been gratitude or might have been goodbye. I watched them drive away, and I felt content. Not happy in the uncomplicated way that erases pain, but satisfied in the deeper way that comes from honoring yourself while still showing up for the people who deserve it. My phone rang as I was driving home. Unknown number. But something made me answer. "Nina Thorne?" "Yes." "This is Father Michael O'Brien from St. Patrick's Church. I'm calling about your father." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Is he all right?" He's asked if you might visit him. He's been attending our prison ministry program, doing some work on himself. He's asked me to reach out and see if you'd be willing to meet. Just once. No expectations, no demands. Just a conversation." I pulled over into a parking lot, needing to focus. "Father, I appreciate you calling, but my father and I don't have a relationship. I'm not interested in revisiting that." "I understand," Father O'Brien said gently. "And I want to be clear. I'm not asking you to reconcile, or forgive, or do anything you're not comfortable with. But I've been working with your father for 2 years now, and I've seen genuine change. Real reflection on the harm he caused, real understanding of his failures. He's not asking for money or help. He's asking for a chance to apologize properly, without strings attached." "He already apologized," I said, "in a letter." "I know," Father O'Brien said. "He told me. He also said you didn't respond, which he respected. But he's dying, Miss Thorne. He was diagnosed with cancer 6 months ago. The prognosis is not good. He has maybe a year left, and he wants to spend some of that time trying to make amends, even if those amends aren't accepted." I sat there in my parked car, engine running, and felt a complicated swirl of emotions I'd thought I'd moved past. My father was dying. The man who'd laughed at my pain, who'd tried to implicate me in his crimes, who'd spent my life making me feel small. He was dying, and he wanted to apologize. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course, Father O'Brien said. If you decide you're willing, visiting hours are Saturdays and Sundays, 1 to 4 p.m. I'll let him know I spoke with you. I drove home in a daze, made tea, sat in my reading chair and stared at nothing. Did I owe him this? Did I owe him a visit, a chance to ease his conscience before he died? Or was this just another way of prioritizing his needs over my peace? I called Evelyn. He's dying, I said when she answered. My father, cancer. He wants to apologize. Do you want to see him? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks I should, because it's the right thing to do. Part of me thinks that's exactly the kind of thinking that got me into trouble with my family in the first place, prioritizing their needs over my well-being. What does your gut say? I sat with the question, listened to myself, really listened, the way I'd learned to do over these past 5 years. My gut says, I spoke slowly, figuring it out as I went, that I don't need his apology. I've moved on. I've built a life. His death doesn't change the fact that he hurt me. And his apology, however genuine, won't undo 31 years of damage. Then don't go, Evelyn said simply. But what if I regret it? Nina, Evelyn said gently. Regret goes both ways. You might regret not going, or you might go and regret reopening that door. The question is, which regret can you live with more easily? I thought about my father in a prison hospital bed, dying slowly, wanting one last chance to ease his guilt. I thought about the lifetime of moments when I'd wanted one chance to feel seen by him, validated by him, loved by him. He hadn't given me those chances when they mattered. Why should I give him this one? I can live with not going, I said finally. I can live with him dying without my forgiveness, because forgiveness isn't something I owe him just because he's dying. I can live with the possibility that he might die feeling guilty, because that guilt is his to carry, not mine to absolve. Then you have your answer, Evelyn said. I didn't go to the prison. I didn't visit my father. I didn't give him the closure he wanted, because closure was something he should have built while he was healthy, while I was still trying, while there was still time to actually change the relationship, rather than just apologize for it at the end. Instead, I wrote him a letter. Dad, Father O'Brien called. He told me you're dying, and that you want to apologize. I don't need your apology. I needed a father who saw me, valued me, supported me. I needed that for 31 years, and I didn't get it. Your apology now doesn't change those 31 years. It just makes you feel better about how they ended. I'm not coming to visit you. I'm not giving you closure, or forgiveness, or peace. I'm not doing that because I'm not responsible for your emotional comfort, especially not at the end of a life where you showed no concern for mine. I don't hate you. I don't wish you suffering, but I also don't owe you my presence or my absolution. You're dying with regrets because you lived in a way that created regrets. That's on you, not me. I hope your death is peaceful. I hope you found whatever spiritual comfort you were looking for. But I'm not part of that journey, and I'm not going to be. Goodbye, Dad. Nina. I sent the letter and felt nothing but relief. Another door closed. Another boundary held. Another moment where I chose myself over someone else's expectations. My father died 4 months later. I found out through a text from Marcus. Your dad passed this morning. Thought you should know. No judgment on however you feel about it. I read the text, absorbed the information, and realized I felt sad. But distantly. Sad for the relationship we never had. For the father he could have been. For the daughter I'd been who'd tried so hard to earn love that should have been freely given. But I didn't cry. I didn't regret not visiting. I didn't feel guilt for holding my boundary. I felt mostly free. I didn't go to the funeral. I sent flowers, because that felt like the right amount of acknowledgement. Impersonal, but respectful. And I went about my work. The foundation had just launched a major new initiative, a grant program for independent historians and researchers from underrepresented backgrounds. We were funding projects that institutions had overlooked, stories that mainstream history had ignored, voices that deserved to be heard. This was what I'd built with the money my family thought I should have used to save them. This was the legacy I was creating. Not wealth for its own sake, but resources in service of truth, of preservation, of making sure that people's stories weren't lost just because they weren't powerful or convenient. A month after my father's funeral, I got a call from Claire. "Mom's moving to Arizona," she said without preamble, "to live with her sister permanently. She's selling what's left of her stuff. She wanted me to ask if you want anything from the house. Any family heirlooms or whatever." I thought about the house I grew up in, now sold to pay restitution. About the furniture and photos and objects that had filled it. The material accumulation of a family that had looked functional from the outside but was hollow at the core. "No," I said, "I don't want anything. Not even Grandma's jewelry. The photo albums. Claire, those things represent a family that never really existed," I said. "Why would I want reminders of that?" A long pause. Then, "Do you ever think about us? About what we used to be?" "We were never anything," I said. Not cruelly, but honestly. We were people living in the same house, following the same scripts, pretending we were close. But we weren't. Not really. "Sophie asks about you," and Claire said. "She wants to know why you don't come to family events." "I see Sophie once a month," I said, "and that's the relationship I've chosen to maintain. If she wants more, I'm open to that, with her specifically. But I'm not coming back to family dinners or holidays or pretending we're close." "We're all she has now," Claire said. And there was something fragile in her voice. "Dad's gone. Mom's leaving. Marcus and I are struggling. You're the only one who's stable, who has their shit together, so." "I have my shit together because I set boundaries," I said, "because I stopped letting you all treat me like I was worthless. That stability came at the cost of this family, Claire. I can't have both." "So that's it? You're just done with us?" "I was done 5 years ago," I said, "when you laughed at the idea of my existence. I've just been letting you all figure it out since then." Another long pause. "I'm sorry," Claire said finally, and she sounded tired rather than defensive. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For that night, for all the nights before it. For every time I made you feel less than. You were right. We did treat you terribly. And I'm sorry. I sat with the apology, testing it against 5 years of hard-won boundaries and self-knowledge. Thank you, I said. I mean that. But it doesn't change anything, Claire. I'm glad you understand now. I'm glad you've reflected on it. But I'm not coming back. I built a life without you, and it's a good life. I'm happy. Are you? She asked, and she sounded genuinely curious. Are you really happy all alone? I'm not alone, I said. I have friends, colleagues, a community of people who respect my work and value my presence. I have Sophie, once a month, which is a relationship I treasure. I have a life full of purpose and meaning and work that matters. Yes, Claire, I'm happy. Happier than I ever was trying to earn your approval. I don't know how to fix this, she said quietly. You can't, I said, not unkindly. Some things, once broken, don't get fixed. They just become part of your history. This is ours. But that's okay. We can both move forward with it. Will you at least tell Sophie goodbye? If Mom leaves, if things change, if... I'm not going anywhere, I interrupted firmly. My relationship with Sophie isn't conditional on anything else. I'll be at the park next Saturday, same as always. And the Saturday after that. And every month after that. As long as she wants me there. That's the one thing that doesn't change, Claire. I show up for her. Thank you, Claire whispered. We hung up, and I sat in the quiet of my apartment, feeling something settle. This was it. The final conversation. The last closure. The end of hoping for something different from people who'd shown me exactly who they were. And I was okay with it. Better than okay. I was Ray. 2 weeks later, on a crisp Saturday morning, I met Sophie at our usual park. She was growing so fast, already losing that little kid roundness, starting to look like the teenager she'd eventually become. Aunt Nina! She ran to me, and I caught her in a hug. Hey, sweetheart. How's school? Good. We're learning about the American Revolution, and I told Miss Peterson that my aunt knows everything about history, and she said maybe you could come to talk to our class. I laughed. I don't know everything, but I'd be happy to visit. Let's check with your mum first. We walked through the park, and Sophie chatted about school and friends and the new book series she was reading. At one point, she stopped and looked up at me seriously. Mommy says Grandpa died. He did, I confirmed gently. A few months ago. Are you sad? A little, said honestly. But it's complicated. Grandpa and I didn't have a good relationship. So I'm sad about what we didn't have more than sad about losing him. Sophie thought about this, her 8-year-old brain working through concepts too big for most adults to handle gracefully. Do you think he loved you? She asked. I think he loved the idea of me, I said carefully. But he didn't love who I actually was. And that's okay. Not everyone gets the family they deserve, but you get to choose how you respond to that. How did you respond? I built my own life, I said, with people who see me for who I am. Like you. Sophie smiled, that brilliant, uncomplicated smile of a child who still believed in the goodness of people. I see you, Aunt Nina. I think you're awesome. And there, in that moment, with a cool breeze carrying leaves across the path and my niece's hand in mine, I felt something I'd spent 31 years searching for. Belonging. Not because of blood or obligation or proximity, but because I'd shown up consistently, loved freely, and let myself be known. That evening, I sat in my reading chair and reflected on the journey from my 31st birthday to now. 5 years of transformation, of boundary setting, of choosing myself when it would have been easier to sacrifice myself. My phone buzzed. An email from a researcher I'd funded through the foundation. Dr. Thorne, I wanted to let you know that the project you funded has been accepted for publication. The collection we digitized is now available to scholars worldwide. And we're already getting requests from researchers who never knew these documents existed. Thank you for making this possible. You've changed the field. I smiled, feeling that familiar warmth of purpose fulfilled. This was why I'd said no to my family's demands for rescue. Not because I was cruel, but because I understood that some people are drowning, and some people are just angry that you learn to swim. My family didn't need saving. They needed to face consequences, to learn accountability, to understand that their comfort wasn't more important than my dignity. And I'd needed to learn that I could survive their disapproval, that I could build a life without their validation, that I could be happy, successful, and fulfilled, while being completely absent from people who'd never valued my presence. I made tea and opened my laptop, pulling up the Foundation's strategic planning documents. We had so much work ahead. New archives to preserve, new scholars to support, new stories to save from oblivion. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Nina Thorne? Yes, this is Amanda Chen, Sophie's old daycare teacher. I'm calling because Claire gave me your number. There's been an incident. My heart rate picked up. Is Sophie okay? Sophie's fine, Amanda assured me quickly. But Claire's been in an accident. She's in the hospital, stable but serious. Marcus is with her, but they need someone to take Sophie for a few days. The emergency contact list has you as... Yes, I said immediately. Yes, I'll take her. Where is she? At the hospital with Marcus. He's trying to manage everything. But Sophie's scared, and she keeps asking for you. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and drove to the hospital, my mind racing through logistics. Sophie could stay with me. I had a guest room, could clear my schedule, could provide stability while Claire recovered. Because this was different. This wasn't being asked to bail out bad decisions or enable destructive patterns. This was a child who needed care, who had no role in adult failures, who deserved to feel safe. This was what family actually looked like. Showing up not out of obligation, but out of love for a person who'd earned your presence. I found Marcus in the waiting room, looking exhausted and scared. Sophie was curled up next to him, her eyes red from crying. Aunt Nina! She launched herself at me, and I held her tight. Hey, sweetheart. I hear you need a place to stay for a bit. She nodded against my shoulder. Is Mommy going to be okay? Your mom is tough, I said, making eye contact with Marcus, who nodded confirmation. She's going to need some time to heal, but she'll be okay. And while she's doing that, you're going to come to stay with me. We'll make it an adventure, okay? Okay, Sophie said in a small voice. Marcus stood, looking at me with something like gratitude and shame mixed together. Thank you. No, you don't owe us anything. I'm not doing this for you, I said quietly, so Sophie couldn't hear. I'm doing it for her, because she matters to me, and she needs stability right now. But Marcus, this doesn't change anything else. I'm still not interested in reconciliation with the family. I'm just showing up for a kid who didn't ask for any of this. I understand, he said, and thank you anyway. Sophie stayed with me for 2 weeks while Claire recovered from her injuries. A serious car accident that required surgery and extensive physical therapy. And in those 2 weeks, I learnt something important. I could extend compassion without sacrificing boundaries. I could help when it was appropriate without being taken advantage of. I could show up for Sophie because I wanted to, not because I was obligated to, and that distinction made all the difference. We fell into a routine. I'd work from home in the mornings, while Sophie did schoolwork at the kitchen table. We'd have lunch together. Then I'd take her to the park or a museum. Evenings were for reading and talking, and the kind of unhurried connection I'd never experienced with my own parents. One night, as I was tucking her into the guest bed, Sophie looked up at me with those serious eyes. Do you think you'll ever talk to Mommy again? Like, really talk, not just about me? I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. Right now, our relationship is about you, and that works for me. Maybe someday that'll change, but I'm not counting on it. She cries sometimes, Sophie said softly, about you, about Grandpa, about how everything fell apart. That's sad, I said, and I meant it. But Sophie, you know what? Sometimes things fall apart because they were never really together to begin with. And that's not your fault. Your fault. And it's not something you can fix. I know, she said. Miss Peterson said families are complicated. Miss Peterson is very wise. When Claire was well enough to have Sophie back, I drove her home. To the small house Claire and Marcus were renting, a far cry from the life they'd once lived, but stable enough for now. Claire met us at the door, still moving slowly, her arm in a sling. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw exhaustion, gratitude, and something that might have been regret. Thank you, she said, for taking care of her, for everything. She's a great kid, I said. It was my pleasure. Sophie hugged me goodbye, making me promise I'd see her next Saturday as usual. As I drove away, I felt that familiar sense of rightness. I'd helped because it was the right thing to do for Sophie, not because I was trying to rebuild bridges I'd deliberately burned. The boundaries held. My peace remained intact. And I went back to my life, my work, my foundation, my carefully constructed world where I was valued and respected and seen. 6 months later, I sat in my office at the Foundation's new headquarters, a beautiful renovated building downtown that finally gave us the space we'd been needing, and reflected on how far I had come. 7 years since the birthday dinner where my sister had wished I'd never been born. 7 years of building, growing, establishing myself as someone who mattered in my field. 7 years of learning that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I'd finally reached indifference with my family. They existed in my life only as it related to Sophie. Otherwise, they were just people I used to know. People whose opinions had once mattered, but now carried no weight at all. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Aunt Nina, guess what? I won the history fair. My project about women archivists in Connecticut won first place. Can I tell you all about it on Saturday? I smiled and texted back. Congratulations, I'm so proud of you. Can't wait to hear everything. And I thought about that little girl growing up in a complicated family, learning early that love could be both present and conditional, that people could show up for you without showing up for the whole system you came from. She'd be okay, I thought. Because someone was showing her that consistency mattered more than connection, that quality mattered more than quantity, that a relationship built on genuine care was worth more than a dozen relationships built on obligation. My assistant knocked on my door. Dr. Thorne? The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Thank you, Jessica. I'll be right there. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the conference room where we'd discuss expansion plans, new grant programs, partnerships with institutions across the country, where I'd lead a team of passionate, dedicated people who shared my vision for preserving the past and making it accessible to everyone. This was my life now, rich in purpose, full of meaning, built on my own terms. And as I walked into that meeting, I thought about my 31st birthday, 7 years ago. About sitting at that table, eating too sweet cake, listening to my family laugh at the idea of my existence. If I could go back and tell that version of myself what was coming, would I? Would I tell her about the foundation, the money, the boundaries, the peace? Or would I let her discover it herself? Let her earn each revelation. Let her build her freedom brick by brick. I think I'd tell her just one thing. The thing that had sustained me through all of it. When they show you who they are, believe them. And then, build something better. Because in the end, that's what I'd done. I hadn't destroyed my family. I'd simply stopped participating in the fiction that we were one. I hadn't sought revenge. I'd sought truth. And the truth had set me free. My phone buzzed one last time before I turned it off for the meeting. An email from an address I didn't recognize, forwarded through the Foundation's general contact form. Subject: Thank you from Bridgeport County Jail. I opened it. Curiosity overriding caution. Miss Thorne, you don't know me. My name is Michael Torres, and I'm currently serving time for embezzlement. I'm writing because I heard about your father. We were in the same facility before he died, and we talked sometimes about family, regret, the things we'd done. He asked me to write to you if anything happened to him. He said you wouldn't read a letter from him, but you might read one from someone else. He wanted you to know that he understood, at the end, why you'd made the choices you made. That he was proud of the work you were doing, even if he'd never told you when it mattered. That he was sorry, genuinely sorry, not for dying, but for how he'd lived. He also said to tell you that you were right. About everything. About boundaries. About consequences. About not owing rescue to people who never valued you to begin with. I'm writing this because your father's regret taught me something. I have a daughter too. I haven't talked to her in 3 years, since my arrest. I'd been planning to reach out, to ask for help, to explain why she should forgive me. But after talking to your father, I realized that's not my call to make. If my daughter has moved on, If she's built a life without me, if she's happier without my presence, then that's what I owe her. Not my guilt, not my need for absolution, just space. So thank you for teaching your father something at the end, and for teaching me something before it's too late. Michael Torres, I read the email twice, then closed it. My father had understood, at the end, had seen, finally, what I'd been trying to tell him for years. It didn't change anything, didn't undo the damage, didn't restore the relationship, didn't make his cruelty hurt less. But it was something, a small confirmation that truth, once spoken clearly enough, eventually gets through. I stood and walked into the board meeting, ready to discuss the future, ready to build on the foundation I'd created, both literally and metaphorically, ready to live the life I'd chosen, the one where I mattered because I said so, not because anyone else confirmed it. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I heard my sister's voice from 7 years ago. Actually, we wish you were never born. And I smiled. Because that cruel moment had been the beginning of my real life. The moment I'd stopped seeking their approval and started building my own worth. The moment I'd learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's thriving. Sometimes the people who wish you didn't exist do you the greatest favor of all. They free you to exist on your own terms. This is for everyone who's ever been told they're not enough by people who never bothered to really see them. You are enough. You always were. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is walk away.